Hey grandparents, we are almost through June. We've been talking about lessons we learned from our grandparents. And I know anytime you start thinking about your grandparents, you just get that nostalgic feel. I can remember the sights and sounds from their homes. And what I want to talk about today, the third thing that I would bring up that I learned from my grandparenting experience as a child and being with them, is to appreciate vintage. And when I say that, I mean appreciating vintage people and things, okay? Let's face it, you and I are starting to be vintage ourselves here, so we have to have a little humor about this aging process. But back to where I started. Remember the sights and sounds of your grandparents' house. That formed such a strong impression, on me as a child, and then even growing into my adulthood and visiting their homes. There were certain things that were unique to the homes of my grandparents. In one grandparent's home, they had a furnace in the basement and they had the big, large grate in the hallway. So the grate, first of all, you could hear the furnace really clearly when it started. But then the grate had its own sound as you walked over it, and it was kind of fascinating as a child to, look down the grate and wonder what was down there. But those creaks and groans, that became part of the impression of the household. Same thing in my other grandparents' home. There were unique sounds associated with that particular home. The other impression was just the quietness of a grandparent's home. It wasn't like the hustle and bustle of a young family home. There was quiet and peace. And then there were all these old beautiful things sitting around, their vases and whatnot that came from their youth, which for my grandparents, that would have been 30s and 40s. So things like Roseville pottery or 50s vintage, dinette set in the kitchen in one grandparent's home. And just seeing those things and learning to appreciate the beauty of them, especially now looking back when those things are truly antiques and you see them for sale on eBay or something and you think, my grandmother had one just like it. But I learned to appreciate the beauty and the peace and the solitude of my grandparents' homes. I would see older style clothing and jewelry and even the things like hairbrushes and hair combs. I actually got to spend time in my great-grandparents' home, and my great-grandmother had very long hair, and so she still used hair combs and hair nets, and she would brush her hair out and then twist it all up in a bun and use combs and pins to put it in place. And she had a very beautiful set of comb and brush that was on her dresser. And so you see those things as a child and they have a certain beauty and mystique about them. And as we grow, we come to appreciate, if we allow ourselves and we don't get sucked into the commercialism of everything has to be brand new and the latest and greatest and most modern, you can appreciate the history and the experiences of seeing the people that you loved working with those items, mixers in the kitchen, you name it, dishware, all the beautiful old things that we associate with our grandparents. So I want you to think about what are your grands seeing in your home that might be special memories some days in their future. What are the sights and sounds that they're seeing that will cause them to appreciate being in the home of an elder, of a grandparent? Teach them to appreciate the past. Tell them the history of some of those things that you have in your home. I spent some time talking with my grandchildren in the last week about a rug. We were moving a rug, and so we'll share a video at some point of the kids all carrying the rug out of the house. It was very cute. But it was a unique rug, and I had had the experience of being in a Turkish rug factory, which was an amazing experience. I'll have to share sometime. But I saw how they made those beautiful rugs. And so I told the grandkids, and it was really interesting how they all just stopped and very intently staring and listening as I talked to them about how this rug had been made. And do that. Take the time to pause and share with them about the things in your home that might be vintage, might be from your youth or even your grandparents. And tell them the family stories, tell them the history of pottery or rug or whatever the item is, why it's in the family, who it came from. Teach them to appreciate vintage items for their beauty and for their history. And then certainly the people, the grandparents, as we are vintage items also. Teach them that there's wisdom to be gained in living a long life, that getting old, it has its difficulties, sure. We all deal with that. But it also has some wonderful things like just the peace that you come to in your inner self and the comfort of living in your own skin and living in your home and being surrounded by memories and family. There's some beauty to that I don't think we appreciate as much as we should sometimes. Tell them about the stories about other people, brothers, sisters of yourself, your grandparents, your parents, other aunts and uncles. Walk them through some of the people that are in the history in their family tree and teach them to appreciate that family history. I personally, looking back now, really wish I had asked more questions, that I had written down answers, captured pictures of some of the items now that, of course, have gone by the wayside as people pass away and things get sold and homes get cleared out. I wish I at least had pictures of some of those items that I could remember, from those times of my youth and spending time with my grandparents. So, question time. What are some of the lessons that you've learned from your grandparents? We've asked that a lot this month, and we're going to keep asking. We're trying to jog your memory, and we want you to share with us, the things you've learned. It's fun to think about the past and think about what a prominent role grandparents can play in the care and nurturing of young people in our communities. And then if you think about the vintage and family history, how can you capture that and pass it on? If you're like me and you have some regrets about not asking the questions when you were a child because you didn't understand the value of knowing certain things, how can you prep that ahead and pass it on to your grandchildren so that someday when you've passed and they're looking back with nostalgia at their experiences with you, they have more of the information that they need to really enjoy that nostalgic moment. Take care and be grand, my friends.